Thank you so much for joining Sharebird's The Essential Go-to-Market Show, tips and strategies where we offer short video content and interview-style conversations with global product marketing leaders. I'm your host, Yasmeen Turayhi. Whether you're an early-stage startup or a public company, almost everyone struggles with the same question. What does it take to have a successful product launch? Today, I'll be talking to Amey Kanade. He is the Senior Manager of Product Marketing at Amazon, and he's part of the Devices Group and is responsible for both sales and marketing strategy for Fire TV, smart TVs at Amazon. So welcome to the show, Amey.
Thank you, Yasmin. The pleasure is mine.
So Amey, we're just going to dive right in. Can you tell us what are some of your top learnings and takeaways on launching a product successfully in market?
It's going to be a long list, but I'll try to be as succinct as possible. I guess one of the top learnings, and just a quick background, although I work for Amazon now, which is a humongous company, it's only been 2.5 months. But for most part, I have been associated with early stage startup, middle stage startups who have just raised money or have raised money and are just about to start making some revenue. So I guess one of the common themes in my career so far, almost over a decade now, has been startups and consumer electronics. I thought that preface was essential because a lot of things as it relates to launching successful products are very different in terms of the challenges which you face are very different for an early stage startup versus a company like Amazon, especially the group I work for at Amazon Devices, which has huge success with Alexas and have multiple Alexa products available in the market now. So going back to your questions, I guess some of the top learnings after launching many products over the past decade or so has been, I can't stress the importance of planning, like how much, I think you have to plan to the point where you think that it's getting ridiculous. Just to give you an example, in one of our go-to-market plans at a previous product, which I launched at a startup, we also had an action item for the security guard. That person has to come in at 7 a.m. in the morning because usually he would come in at 8 a.m. So on that day of launch, he had to come in on 7 a.m. So there was an action item for our security guard that he has to be in the office. So I'm just giving this as an example, like the amount of planning which should go in. And think of it as a wedding plan, like things which would go wrong, go wrong. So of course, and that day, the security guard didn't turn up. And then I had to hit the launch button for an Indiegogo project. And I had to find a nearby cafe and then, do the thing. So this is just an example. But at the same time, I would say planning is important. Like having a strong plan is important. But at the same time, plans are worthless. Planning is everything. So your plan has to keep evolving, right? So if something fails, what's your plan B? What's your plan C? If you are extremely successful, then also, what your plan, like how are you going to pivot? It's a good problem to have if your Indiegogo project goes viral, but then you also have to think of how are you going to fulfill your orders? Like how are you going to manage all these customers and things like that? So I would probably say at a very high level, planning is key. And then you can go down in specific aspects of it, like planning pre-launch, post-launch, during launch. And there are different aspects of it. So I won't go into the nitty-gritty details.
Great. Yeah, thank you. And can you talk to us about some of the biggest mistakes you've seen when it comes to product marketing? Maybe you could share something that you think folks have to just kind of think about before they put together their own go-to-market.
I can certainly talk about the mistakes which I have made or have seen, the companies I have worked at. In hindsight, everything's 2020. So while we were doing it, we thought we had everything in place. But then, of course, when things didn't go as planned, we kind of okay, we could have planned it better. But I guess some of the top high level points I would probably say are not knowing your market enough. So something which worked in, let's say, US or something which worked for a certain demography might not necessarily work for someone else, right? So might not necessarily work even in Canada, which is something which worked in the US. So not knowing your market is probably, one of the biggest mistakes I have seen. I have made it myself. Oh yeah, it worked in the US, it should work in Canada. It's just a different country. But then of course the geography is different. So you have to take those nuances in picture. The second one I would probably say not knowing your customer well enough. And that probably goes much beyond, much deeper than just knowing your typical gender or, age. So how do we define personas? How can we get more nuanced in those personas definition? So that's all product marketers its definition. So I guess not knowing your personas or not knowing your customer well enough is probably another big mistake I've seen. I'll give you an anecdotal example. One of the startups I worked at was an action camera device. So it was an action camera it's just like a GoPro, but it was a 360 degrees camera. One of our customers, I guess the biggest market we wanted to go after was the skiing industry. And we did pretty well within that industry. And then the next market was like, okay, so it works for this one action sports market. It should also work for the surfing industry. And we didn't do well in the surfing industry. The product was not well designed for surfers, skiers. If a skier falls in snow, he might break a leg or two, but at the end of the day, he's falling in snow. But if a biker falls on a concrete ground, your camera is going to break. So things like that. So I'm giving a very specific example, but at a high level, I would say not knowing your customer well enough is probably another example. And I think another anecdotal example I can give, last point I would make on this is, although GTM is traditionally seen as a product marketeer's function, the most successful launches I have seen are where you leverage everyone in the team. Right. So it's not just, GTM's responsibility. Of course, you are the gatekeeper and you are basically leading the way, but make sure it takes a village to launch a great successful product. So make sure you leverage not just on the expertise, but have an action item for your social media person, for your paid marketing person, things like that. So make sure everyone is involved. So it's also your job to rally the entire team and not just limited to your product marketing team or not just even limited to your marketing team, but, cast a wide net as much as you can.
I think that's such an important and powerful point that the GTM person is not just the only person responsible for go-to-market. It's really a cross-functional stakeholder collaborative event that takes place. So really, really important.
The mistake I did was, sorry to cut you there. The mistake I did was I kind of early in my career, I used to take it upon myself that it's my responsibility and, so I have to do it. But over the time I learned, if you want to launch a successful product, every company wants to launch a successful product. So it's not just the GTM person's responsibility. It's the entire company's responsibility. So try to rally everyone in the company is what I'd say.
I've definitely made that mistake before as well, trying to hold all pieces of the go-to-market just on my own, but it's near impossible. And I think being able to delegate is, just as important as owning parts of the go-to-market process. So
of course.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
Amay, can you talk to us about some of the items on your go-to-market checklist? What do you think are really important pieces for folks to think about as they're launching a product in market?
Yeah, so that's a good question. And I don't know if I have a very clear answer to that. Clear in the sense, because every product launch has been very different. But as I mentioned earlier, my advice would be to be as detailed as possible to the point you feel that you are overdoing it. The example I gave earlier was we had an action item for a security guard, right? So it felt like, okay, that's just ridiculous that you have a GTM meeting and then you also invited a security person just to make sure that he's opening the doors of our office at 6 a.m., ungodly hours. But of course, that guy didn't turn up and our plan was so I had to rush around. But so I would probably say my plan has been, I don't think so I have ever had a same plan or a checklist at every company I worked. I worked at around 4 or 5 companies so far, most of them startups, and have launched maybe around 50 odd products. And I don't think so any one of those 50 launches had followed the same template. You probably would find multiple templates online, but every product launch is different. Maybe at a high level, you can probably group them in pre-launch activities, during the launch activities, like the day of launch, and then post-launch. And I would probably say that your job doesn't end on the day of launch. It says go to market. Yeah, it's in the market now, and now it's, someone else takes over. You basically have to plan maybe T plus 30 days, T plus 60 days, T plus 90 days, or, T plus 1 year on how that success looks like, right? You have achieved all the goals which you planned in your pre-launch phase. So I guess I would group them at a high level, like activities which you would do focus, pre-launch, and that probably goes back from your launch day from 3 months to a year, or maybe even more in some cases, where your job is mainly around planning, market research, customer research, and things like that, and bringing these valuable insights back to the product team. On the day of launch, if it's a media event, if it's a press event, if it's an online event, you need to be as detailed as possible. And then post-launch is basically how you evaluate your success or failure and how you learn from it, right? And that again goes on for a considerable amount of time. So again, I probably don't have a very clear answer to what, I don't have a template for that, how it varies from product to product.
That's great. I think also a lot of companies tend to ask for go-to-market templates. And while they're like really good at a high level, I agree that every single go-to-market that I've ever built is always very different. And
Yep.
so it's really interesting how people just want to do a copy paste exercise with it. And there's so much nuance. And I also think there's so much experience and pattern recognition that happens when you're in the seat of go-to-market ownership. You start to see, oh, something similar happened in the past on this particular go-to-market launch. Let's not make the same mistake again here, right? So I think like it really does help if you have seen enough go-to-market launches to be able to recognize the patterns. But again, yeah, couldn't agree more. And I always cringe when someone asks me, "Oh, can you just send me a go-to-market template?" I'm like, it's not going to be as helpful as you think. So,
Exactly.
yeah.
One additional thing I'll probably add to that is, that's something which I have learned over time, is to have plan Bs and plan Cs and plan Ds. And for both, if you're failing and if you're successful, right? Like, what are you going to? So I'll give you a most recent example of an Indiegogo project which we launched. It turned out to be the number one product the company had ever launched, and I think it's still ranked as the number one product on Indiegogo within that category. This product, we were skeptical if we are going to be successful. So we had plans for what happens if we are not successful. So like we were like, okay, if we are not successful, then we are going to we're going to cast a wider net in terms of paid marketing initiatives. We're going to go full blast on that. We'll double our budget. Or in terms of our email newsletters, our initial plan A was to send out newsletters to a very small subset of our users. But if it doesn't work, then we'll go out, cast a wider net. So things like that. So like, we had like plan Bs and plan Cs, and we also had plan Bs and Cs if we were to be successful. And, thankfully we were successful on, okay, how do we capture that momentum now that we are successful? How can we like even double down on what we already were doing, right? So we added different pricing tiers, different products. So like people who had already bought a headphone, now we were selling them chargers and things like that. So that was already a part of the plan, but it didn't make sense for us to add a charger when the product was unsuccessful. So we had plan A, B, C, Ds for both successes and failures. I would probably say your GTM plan should also include, that aspect of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. So your overall theme is really about planning beyond any kind of expectation, just continuously planning and planning, which
Yeah,
I
I
think
would say
is
so.
really, really important, right? Like scenario building, right? You going through different scenarios of what could happen and where to index your time right after a launch as well. So great. Ame, we are running out of time. So I just wanted to ask if you can share some key takeaways on what you want to tell folks as product marketers or as go-to-market owners. What's your key takeaway and what are you paying attention to right now?
I mean, right now I work for Amazon. I mean, it's been a very long time that I've never worked for a large company of this size. So it's very different. The culture is very different. So I'm still new at this company. So I think most of my attention and my brain cells are going towards learning and ramping up with Amazon processes. But in general, I spend a lot of time like reading about consumer electronics, as in that's the domain I'm in, keeping at par with like whatever the recent launches are this year. I mean, I love to go to CES. We didn't have CES this year, but then you have online avenues where I participate actively on platforms like Sharebird, and there are a bunch of Reddit forums. There are a few other PMM platforms where like-minded people hang out. Within Amazon, we have several Slack groups for product marketeers and marketeers in general. So yeah, so I think that's that. My key takeaways, I mean, product marketing is a very fascinating line of work. In all honesty, 10 years ago, when I started off in product marketing, I didn't know I was doing the job of a product marketeer. I was working at this early stage startup coming out of Carnegie Mellon University, and I was doing everything which a typical product marketer would do. And then I happened to bump into a few friends from the Bay Area. Okay, it sounds like you are a product marketer. So that's how I actually ended up in product. And I like it. I like it mainly because like it's a great spot for someone who loves marketing or more outward focus, but at the same time doesn't want to lose touch from technology and want to be like this product centric person. So it's a good balance to maintain. So I personally, and no offense to brand marketeers or such, I think those lines of work like skew more outwards and like more towards like outbound initiatives. But product marketing is a good balance between your technology and marketing. So like creative and science both.
Yeah, well, I completely agree. I think that's also what attracted me to product marketing. I love the blend of all these disciplines together and being as kind of close to product as you can get without being a product manager. So,
Right.
Ame, thank you so much for your time. And where can people find you?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn. My name is pretty unusual, so it shouldn't be too hard to find me on LinkedIn. Yes, I guess the best way would be to find me on LinkedIn. I guess I'm also on Sharebird. So like Sharebird, I often contribute on Sharebird. So if anyone wants to touch base, we can connect on Sharebird as well.
Okay, wonderful. And for our audience, stay tuned for upcoming shows with product marketing leaders from startups to public companies as they share some of their best tips and strategies on the go-to-market process. And please be sure to send us a note, tell us what you learned, tag me, tag Amey, tag Sharebird, and we'd really love to hear from you. And for those of you who are looking for more material on go-to-market, you can also check out my book, Product Marketing Debunked, which is on Amazon, or one of my many articles on Medium. And if you're really serious about go-to-market, you can also check out my online class. Details in the bio. Thanks again.